Welcome to Flashback, the back half podcast where we revisit the science fiction and fantasy stories of my youth, the new wave and its aftermath, that period of science fiction after the golden age had faded and before cyberpunk took over the world. Did these stories stand the test of time? That's a big question for today as we jump into the December 1982 issue of Asimov Science Fiction magazine and explore the genre's flirtation with fascism, a rare foray into politics by Isaac Asimov himself, and how this issue pointed towards the mess we're in 2025. Elon Musk has terrible reading comprehension skills. So do Peter Thiel, Jeff Bezos, Sergey Brin, and all the other tech bros who cite their favorite science fiction and fantasy novels as their inspiration for running roughshod over the country in their pursuit of wealth and power. Musk, who is estranged from his trans daughter, has cited Ian M. Banks' culture novels as an inspiration for many of his companies, but seems to have missed the point of a post-scarcity future where humans routinely change their gender to experience more of what humanity encompasses. Thiel takes the names of his companies from The Lord of the Rings, then makes Palantir into the real-world equivalent of the Eye of Sauron. Bezos loved the hard science fiction series The Expanse so much he saved the TV adaptation from cancellation, but never seems to have comprehended the deeply humanistic themes contained in the meticulously realized physics of space travel. Brin, along with Mark Zuckerberg, read Snow Crash and took it as aspirational rather than somewhat cautionary. I could provide a lot more examples, but it's basically shooting fish in a barrel. The bigger point is that some of the richest and most powerful people in the history of the world have cited works of optimism and shared responsibility as the catalyst for unleashing their radical libertarianism on our government, economy, and culture. While these textually challenged guys have misinterpreted some of the classics of the genre, those of us who are fans know that science fiction in particular has long harbored a reactionary and violence-hungry wing. In my previous Flashback column, I touched on Jerry Pournelle, the radical libertarian and paleo-conservative science fiction author and proponent of space lasers and tactical nuclear warfare. Along with guys like Larry Niven and Robert Heinlein, and they are almost exclusively guys, they spent the 60s and 70s carving out a popular niche for right-wing militaristic science fiction dedicated to extreme libertarianism. Despite the tech bros pointing to the well-loved classics of the genre, I think this lesser-loved branch is where they get their true inspiration. Musk, after all, has also cited Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, the ham-fisted story of a moon colony launching an AI-assisted libertarian rebellion, as another inspiration. Which brings me to the December 1982 issue of Asimov Science Fiction magazine, where both sides of this genre division briefly come into open conflict. The big draw for this issue is a profile interview with Pournelle, the politics behind the prose. It's a doozy. There are plenty of insane quotes, but I want to start with this one because it is presciently relevant to our current political situation. Representative democracy is not the be-all and end-all. I don't give a damn if the political system is monarchical or elective, so long as it leaves me alone. And my suspicion is, by the way, that a king has less power over me than a president. Pournelle said this under Ronald Reagan. After pulling out a gun, because of course he does, and declaring his house rule in Los Angeles, all guns are always loaded, he goes on a 3-hour rant about every conservative hobby horse that you can still see on Fox News today. Following up brandishing a weapon with his thoughts on an absolute right to bear arms, he cites Switzerland as a model of near-universal gun ownership without mentioning that the Swiss model is well-regulated, to nab a phrase. Most of his ranting is bog-standard Birch Society bullshit, but his bullshit was influencing a generation. My generation, which is the one that produced all those tech bros I mentioned up top. Ideas have consequences, especially with self-proclaimed geniuses who may not be as smart as they think they are. After praising guns and extolling the harnessing of violence, it's a short hop to praising Mussolini and fascism, apparently Nazi Germany wasn't real fascism, and claiming that fascists are considerably less enemies to traditional Western civilization than communists. Then he launches into an attack on a supposedly Marxist college professor because that has always been the go-to play for conservative activists. Notably, Pournelle worked in the California aerospace industry, which makes a lot of sense because I totally see him as a white guy who would lose his shit at Whammy Burger if he couldn't order breakfast at 11:34 a.m. That's a Falling Down reference for those not familiar with 90s era Michael Douglas movies. Let's take on some more choice Pournelle quotes. We have this whole universe with trillions of stars in it to conquer. It's all ours as far as we can tell. Yeah, this is the type of hubris infecting tech bros these days. So, people have to invent reasons for being unhappy. No, they fucking don't, you asshole. Not everyone enjoys a cushy government-funded job in aerospace. People tell me ways I ought to live, but I look at them and they don't seem to be as content as I am, or to have as many reasons to be content as I do. Let's dig into this one, which is probably engraved on a lintel somewhere in Silicon Valley. This is a core misconception of his and his comrades, born of myopia, ego, and solipsism. If you refuse to believe, you may be wrong. If the only way you see the world is through your own personal superiority, then of course you're going to be angry with anyone who proposes a different way of doing things, a different way of interpreting our surroundings, a different way of appreciating the lives of people other than ourselves. He truly believes this stuff, but sincerity and belief is overvalued with regard to fascists. We need to remember that these days. Because Pournelle is a self-evident prick, he also chooses to snipe at the namesake of the magazine he's interviewing with this quote. Isaac Asimov has an asinine motto, "Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent." Asimov took to his own defense in this issue, despite generally refraining from politics, beginning with the story of a young man who asked him at an event why, if violence was the refuge of the incompetent, there was so much violence in the world. He answered, fairly obviously, it is because there are so many incompetents in the world. He goes on to cite his Foundation trilogy, another classic work cited by Musk and his ilk as a great inspiration, as a story of the futility and inefficiency of violence, though he didn't explicitly set out to include it. It evolved from the story. Asimov writes, however, the thesis sinks in unconsciously for those people who have a tendency to thought and competence, a classification that tends to include the generality of my readers, and that gives them pleasure. As an Asimov reader, I'm flattered, but given the present-day actions of some of his biggest and most powerful fans, I think he may have given his readers too much credit. And now for the stories. The excitement in this issue does come from the politics because most of the stories are meh or worse, with what good stuff there is packed away at the end. Since I don't want to completely slag authors on work they did 40 years ago, I'll try to be brief on the bad. The Protector by Art Vesity follows a seemingly disturbed man who calls himself the protector of the human race from invading aliens as he stalks and kills those aliens he suspects to be disguised as humans. Is he a protector of the Earth, or is he a misogynist serial killer? Spoiler, he's both. What might have been an interesting take on a trope is heavily weighed down by dialogue that would be at home in a lower-tier sci-fi movie. Stomping Down Stroke a Prospect by Richard A. Lupoff sports some truly ugly artwork that makes me feel sympathy for the author. I've been screwed by off-putting art on a project, and it really sucks. While this story gets points for being an interesting alternate future where Soviet iconography suggests a different outcome to the Cold War, and people harbor secret interspecies sexual desires, it's still too flat in its narrative to truly stand out. The Mysterious Cure by J.O. Jepson is a trifle that reminds us that writers really love to write about writers, something I'm guilty of myself. Quill Tripstickler Hits Bottom by John Shirley tells you most of what you need to know in the title. It's going to be silly and filled with weird words for the sake of being weird. The action takes place on the continent of Spoo in the planet Bottom. It also features a businessman with a, quote, already oversized nose, and I'm just going to move along from that. Now we finally hit a bright spot with Heart in Winter by Rand B. Lee, the story of a teenage boy who contains 3, maybe 4, different personalities who are individually an empath, a telepath, and a telekinetic. They're on the run from another telekinetic from their past, as well as the authorities. What sets this apart from the first few stories, aside from being compelling and interestingly written, is that it's a very queer-oriented story for 1982 in Asimov's, which was generally considered the more lightweight and young adult-focused of the science fiction magazines. One of the personalities, the heart of the title, is a tall, full-haired woman who has a relationship with a straight man, which is both ahead of the curve on gender, but also unsettling because of the age of the body she's inhabiting. It also reads like a lot of Stephen King's work of that time as a combination of Firestarter, Carrie, and The Dead Zone. I'm surprised he never turned this into a full novel. I looked up the author and found that he is an openly gay writer with a number of published stories through the 2010s. I sent him a quick message letting him know I enjoyed the story because it's never too late to tell a writer you liked their work. I don't recall reading it when I was 15, but given how I turned out, it had a better impact on me than all that Pournelle nonsense. The magazine briefly dips back into the meh category with The Ballad of Jake the Snake and the Rock and Roll Kid by J.P. Killis, a neo-western where an unexplained technology has turned all music into a deadly weapon wielded by musicians. Not a great story, though it seems like a great concept for an anime series. A Long Way Home by Sheila Finch Rayner brings the level back up with a tale of a mutant society and the one able-bodied woman among them who serves as a healer but is considered a witch. It seems at first that this is a standard post-apocalypse, but it takes a turn into something different and unexpected that takes on a core feature of Star Trek philosophy, the Prime Directive, and its seamier ramifications. Like Heart and Winter, this feels like it could have easily been the seed for a full novel. Finally, the issue wraps up with Glenn Cook's Dark War, a story I approach with some lowered expectations, both because of the overall vibe of the issue and because the Space Cat cover made me think I was going to get something a little more trite. Instead, it's a nifty little space opera that packs in a lot of world building in a short space for this feline species at interstellar war with humanity. They're envious of mankind, dealing with a war-torn history, and desperately turning to a tribe of feline priestesses as a last resort to save their planet, even though that same tribe may destroy them. Regarding those priestesses, the Sylph, they proclaim to possess the memories of their foremothers, which instantly tips off that this is heavy borrowing from Dune and the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers, except the Sylph are far more warlike. This is solid, classic magazine science fiction, a bit derivative, or to be more charitable, obvious in its homage, but well constructed and written with a superbly interesting setting. It's a great way to end an uneven issue. Closing out the issue is the usual letters to the editor. There's a funny letter lamenting that the quality of science fiction has been declining over the years. It will always be fascinating to me how human beings can live through great innovations, expanded arts, and increases in the quality and quantity of life and still bitch and moan that some past time was better. It's an inherent flaw of the species. Another letter laments something different, the rise of the moral majority and the anti-science movement of the early 80s. All I can say is, wait 40 years, you won't believe what happens next. Next time in Flashback, we'll jump into Amazing Science Fiction Stories for their January 1982 issue, featuring the always abrasive Harlan Ellison, an alternate Nazi future from the perspective of Joseph Goebbels, and a story of race relations on the moon titled The Rape of Things to Come. What could possibly go wrong? Thanks for listening and keep looking forward.